there's absolutely no question that the US-China contest will accelerate over the next 10 to 20 years, And, I wrote a book, Has China Won, about it. And it's an iron law of history that when the world's number one emerging power today is China, is about to overtake the world's number one power, which today is the US, the world's number one power will always push down the world's number. It's like a mechanical thing that happens in history. So there's no question. But the question is, how do you manage it? And I actually think it can be managed, And for example, I think Donald Trump, if his first priority is to grow the American economy, while he'll be tough on China, he's also open to a deal on China. So, that in that sense, he might be not completely bad news for China. And in the case of ASEAN, you're right, ASEAN has made every effort to be friends with China, to be friends with the US. And we have actually succeeded in a spectacular fashion. Let me just give you some data. In the year 2000, US trade with Southeast Asia, with ASEAN, was 135 billion. And China's only 40 billion. So less than one-third US trade. By 2022, US trade had gone to 500 billion, but China's trade with ASEAN had grown to almost 1 trillion, 975 billion, from 40 to 9. So these are phenomenal figures, okay? It was the world's largest trading relationship. But at the same time, we also have a situation whereby the US has invested more in ASEAN than it has in China, Japan, Korea, and India combined. Even though China, Japan, Korea, and India are much bigger economies than ASEAN is. So it shows you there's some degree of geopolitical acumen in Southeast Asia that has been developed over the years. So I'm reasonably confident that we can navigate these difficult geopolitical waters.
Kishore, I just want to end, but I have to ask this question. One final one, if you can be very brief. You've talked about rising and falling powers and how they relate to each other. So the reality of China rising is also a fact, that it is right. Its interests are expanding, and some have viewed China's rise as an economic power and related it to somewhat expansionist ideas that it has had in South China Sea or East China Sea or with borders in the Himalayas. Do you see that trend also through the lens of a rising power trying to shape its periphery, or is there some other explanation, perhaps domestic politics, or perhaps the personality of the present Chinese president? How do you assess that dynamic?
I always begin by emphasizing one point: the idea that you can have a benevolent great power. But the term benevolent great power is an oxymoron. All great powers, including United States, China, will put their interests first. And there's absolutely no question that China will become far more assertive as it becomes stronger and bigger and more muscular. But there's a big difference between being assertive and being aggressive. So I predict that China will become more assertive, but it won't become more aggressive. Because one of the things the Chinese have learned over 2,000 years, that the worst way to win a war is to fight it. So the first goal of any good Chinese leader is to avoid wars. I mean, you still exercise influence, they have a lot of impact and all that, but you don't get involved in wars. Because wars at the end of the day is what will drag you down, and wars at the end of the day will prevent China from achieving what it wants to become, which is the number one economy in the world.